And we'll get ready now to have the teaching. Okay, so let us then begin. We could begin with 3 little bows to the Buddha. 1, 2, 3. And then I'll recite the line of homage. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Oh, so homage to the Blessed One, the Worthy One, the fully enlightened one. Okay, so good morning, everybody, and welcome to people coming from whatever country you're coming from. And so we are continuing now with our presentations on what I call the path to liberation in early Buddhism. So in the first class in this series, we explained briefly the Noble Eightfold Path. Then over the next, I think it was 3 classes, we looked at the sutta on the elephant's footprint, which lays down the sequential practice of the monastic training. And in today's class and next month's class, we'll be dealing with a different presentation of the path, which are called the factors of enlightenment. And there are many discourses or suttas on the factors of enlightenment in the Samyutta Nikaya in chapter 46. So we'll be using just a few of these suttas as the basis for our exploration. Okay, the word that is translated into English as factors of enlightenment, in Pali, the word is bojjhanga. And you could see from the text on the screen that the word bojjhanga is a combination of the word bodhi, which means enlightenment or awakening, and anga, factors. Yeah, so bodhi anga in Sanskrit would come out as bodhyanga. Yeah, but what happens in Pali is that when this syllable D is followed by an A, then the DHI gets transformed into JH plus A. Yeah, because Pali is sort of based on spoken languages. Yeah, so if you try to say bodhyanga, it's a little bit difficult. So in the spoken dialects, then the dya gets changed into ja, so it becomes bojjhanga. So if you pronounce that, you see it's easy to pronounce. Okay, so in what sense are these factors called bojjhanga or factors of enlightenment? So I think we could say in 2 senses they're called factors of enlightenment. In the first, this is in the stage of actual practice. They are the factors that lead to enlightenment, the factors that bring the attainment of enlightenment. And then at a later stage, more advanced stage, these factors, bojjhangas, they become the components of enlightenment, the factors that make up the experience of enlightenment. Yeah, here I think we can see a difference maybe in the position of the suttas and the abhidhamma. So in the suttas, the bojjhangas are more treated as the factors that lead to enlightenment, whereas in the abhidhamma, there comes the tendency to regard the 7 bojjhangas as the components of enlightenment, the factors that make up the experience of enlightenment. Okay, so I think I took this sutta here. It's from the chapter 46, number 5, which shows how the Bojjhangas are understood or explained in the suttas. Yeah, so I think this sutta, okay, in this sutta, a certain monk comes to the Buddha and says that he's heard this expression, Bojjhanga, Bojjhanga, factors of enlightenment. And then he says, in what sense are they called factors of enlightenment? And then the Buddha answers that they lead to enlightenment, and therefore they're called factors of enlightenment. So you could see here in this passage, the word factors is used in the causal sense. So these are 7 factors that lead to enlightenment, that bring the attainment of enlightenment. And then the Buddha enumerates, when he's in his answer, he enumerates what they are. And so you could see what the 7 factors are. So we have the enlightenment factor of mindfulness. Then we have one called, in Pali, it's called Dhamma Vichaya. So here I translated this as discrimination of states, of mental states. But it could also be translated investigation of things. And then we have the enlightenment factor of energy. And then we have the factor of piti. In Pali, the word is piti, which here is translated rapture. Maybe not such a good translation. So also we could render piti as maybe delight or joy, but powerful joy. And then the enlightenment factor of tranquility, and then concentration, and then equanimity. Okay, now the way I look at these 7 factors of enlightenment, they're joined in a sequence, as you could see, going from the basic to the final stage, the culmination. But I see a distinction between the stages of the path presented in the sutta on the elephant's footprint and the stages in the 7 factors of enlightenment. Now, the path, as described in the sutta on the elephant's footprint, consists of stages, or for the most part, of stages of practice. You begin with following precepts or observing moral discipline, then you move to restraint of the senses, and then you practice mindfulness and clear comprehension. Then you go into solitude, you overcome the 5 hindrances, then you attain the jhanas and the higher knowledges. Yeah, so these are things that one actually practices, stages of practice. But the factors of enlightenment, the 7 factors of enlightenment, maybe they could be divided into 2 groups. So we might see the first 3 factors as the things that one actually practices. So sati, or mindfulness, of course, is absolutely essential. That is really the starting point. And then with the second factor, investigation of states of mind, one starts to gain insight into the states of one's own mind, the functions or the factors operating in one's own mind. And then, of course, you have to arouse energy to apply yourself to the practice and to strengthen the practice. But the other 4 factors, it seems, emerge as, I call them, inwardly experienced mental qualities. They emerge as the practice progresses. Yeah, so this is joy, tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. So I would describe these as stages of inward experience rather than as stages of practice. Okay, one thing that you'll note when you look at this sutta and many of the other suttas in this chapter on the enlightenment factors is that they're always described or often described by this fixed formula based upon seclusion, based upon dispassion, based upon cessation, maturing in relinquishment. Yeah, so here in the printed text, this formula is mentioned only for the first and the last, but in the way of recitation, oral recitation, it would be recited for each one of them. And so the first of these terms of the formula is based upon seclusion. So in Pali, this would be viveka nisita. Yeah, the commentaries sometimes explain this term, or the term seclusion, by distinguishing three kinds of seclusion. Yeah, so the first of these is called kaya viveka, which means seclusion of body or physical seclusion. So the ideal to get bodily seclusion is to go off into solitude, into a little hut, or in the old days, to sit at the foot of a tree. Or nowadays, there are meditation centers, so you can go to a meditation center for a retreat. Or if you're practicing at home, you just find a quiet and secluded place in your home, a little room, or even a corner of your bedroom to practice. Yeah, the second kind of seclusion is called chitta viveka, which means seclusion of mind. And this means the separation of the mind from the mental hindrances, the defilements like lust, ill will, laziness, restlessness, and so on. Yeah, so when the mind is secluded from these mental defilements, then the enlightenment factors can arise and gain in strength. And then the third type of seclusion is called, in Pali, is called upadi viveka, which we could just translate as ultimate seclusion. And this is referring to nibbana, and nibbana is called seclusion because it is secluded from or separate from all the impermanent phenomena of the world. And so this is the goal of the enlightenment factors, the aim of the practice. And so you could say that one develops the enlightenment factors based upon seclusion, first in the sense that one goes off into physical seclusion to develop them, and then they gain in strength when the mind is secluded from the obstacles and hindrances. And they are based upon seclusion in that they take nibbana or liberation as their aim. Okay, then next, the enlightenment factors are said to be raga nisitang. And viraga here is dispassion, the ending of passion or lust. And then the enlightenment factors are said to be nirodha nisitang. So that is based upon cessation. And we could say that they're said to be based on cessation in that they aim at the ending of craving and suffering. And then the enlightenment factors, all of them are said to mature in relinquishment, to progress or develop towards relinquishment. Yeah, so the enlightenment factors, we could say they're said to ripen or to mature in relinquishment in the sense that their goal is the giving up of all attachments. Okay, so that takes care of this descriptive, this formula that is attached to each of the enlightenment factors. Okay, now in some suttas, the 7 enlightenment factors are divided into 2 groups. Yeah, so these 2 groups, one of them can be called the stimulating or energizing factors, and the other group can be called the calming factors or quieting factors. So the stimulating factors are the factors that we could say awaken, stimulate, and arouse the mind. So these would be the investigation of states, the investigation of things, energy, and rapture or joy. And the calming factors, those are the factors that quiet the mind. And those are the factors of tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. So we have 3 stimulating factors and 3 calming factors. And so notice that of the 7 factors of enlightenment, one of them doesn't belong to either group, neither stimulating nor quieting. And that factor is mindfulness. Okay, mindfulness is the factor that helps to balance the 2 groups. Mindfulness ensures that when your mind becomes too quiet, too calm, that you stir up the stimulating factors, especially energy. And then when the mind gets too excited, too much aroused, then mindfulness ensures that you bring up the calming factors to quiet the mind down. Yeah, so you could say that mindfulness is the factor that brings the mind back into balance. That's why there is a sutta where the Buddha says that mindfulness is useful everywhere. Okay, then just the last paragraph in this short sutta shows the result of developing the enlightenment factors. And so when you develop these 7 factors of enlightenment to the highest point, then the mind is liberated from the asavas or the defilements. Okay, so here it's just enough to understand that when the 7 enlightenment factors reach fulfillment, the mind is liberated from the deep roots of suffering and of our bondage to samsara. Yeah, so this paragraph is very similar to the end of the sutta on the elephant's footprint, and so I'm not going to discuss this now in any detail. And so now I'll go on to the next sutta that I've taken for today's talk. And this is in the Bojjhanga Samyutta, the discourses on the enlightenment factors. It's number 3, the 3rd sutta. Okay, so the sutta begins, the Buddha is speaking to the monks, apparently to younger monks, and he's saying that you should draw close to monks who are accomplished in virtue, concentration, wisdom, liberation, and the knowledge of liberation. Okay, then he goes on to say, so you draw close to these monks in order to hear their teaching of the Dhamma. And then when you've heard their teaching of the Dhamma, then he says, then you withdraw, you go off into solitude by way of two kinds of withdrawal, two kinds of seclusion, withdrawal of body and withdrawal of mind. Yeah, so here, even though the word used is different, but you could see that it's referring to those two kinds of seclusion that I mentioned, seclusion, physical seclusion, and mental seclusion. Okay, so then the text continues. It says, when you have gone into seclusion, then you recollect that Dhamma and think it over. Okay, so then he continues, when a monk, I'll just sort of skip over some words. So when a monk recollects that Dhamma and thinks it over, on that occasion, the enlightenment factor of mindfulness is aroused by the monk. Yeah, I find that it is interesting and even a little bit puzzling that this sutta connects the enlightenment factor of mindfulness to recollecting the Dharma and thinking it over. Yeah, in the Anapanasati Sutta and in some other texts, the seven factors of enlightenment are said to emerge from practicing the four satipatthanas, the four foundations of mindfulness. And that seems more reasonable to me. Yeah, so you set out to practice the four foundations of mindfulness, and then as one's mindfulness gains in strength, it becomes the first of the seven factors of enlightenment. And then in another sutta that I had in the reading list, let's just jump down to it. There's a wandering ascetic who comes to the Buddha and asks, what are the things that when developed and cultivated bring true knowledge and liberation? And then the Buddha says, the seven factors of enlightenment. Yeah, and then the wanderer asks the Buddha, what are the things that fulfill the seven factors of enlightenment? And the Buddha answers the four establishments of mindfulness, or the four foundations of mindfulness. And then also in the Samyutta Nikaya, in the chapter on the enlightenment factors, there is a group of suttas which show that the seven enlightenment factors can also arise on the basis of different kinds of meditation subjects, even the meditation on the decomposition of a corpse. And so the enlightenment factors can really arise on the basis of any practice that involves developing mindfulness. Okay, now coming back to our sutta, to the text of our sutta, you could see that the text says, on that occasion, the enlightenment factor of mindfulness is aroused by the monk. On that occasion, the monk develops the enlightenment factor of mindfulness. On that occasion, the enlightenment factor of mindfulness comes to fulfillment by development in the monk. Yeah, if you just read the sutta quickly, you don't notice any significance in these three expressions, but they are significant. Yeah, so the passage is actually showing three stages in the development of each enlightenment factor. Yeah, so in the first stage, one starts off by arousing that particular enlightenment factor. Yeah, so this means that one has to make an effort to give rise to it. One makes a deliberate effort to bring that enlightenment factor into existence. Okay, then the second stage you develop the enlightenment factor. And so here you just continue with the practice, making that enlightenment factor stronger, more powerful, and more stable. And then in the third stage, the enlightenment factor comes to fulfillment by development. That is, as one develops it, the enlightenment factor reaches the highest point. Yeah, the enlightenment factors come to fulfillment with the attainment of what is called the world transcending path, the different stages of actual enlightenment. Okay, so now you could see that the enlightenment factors are described here. Each enlightenment factor is described in the same way with the same three phrases. Okay, and so we have the sequence, and the sequence begins with mindfulness. So by cultivating mindfulness, you start to get a better understanding of the workings of your own mind. We could say that mindfulness opens up one's inner being, one's inner states, which has usually been hidden from us. So even when we do a simple practice like being mindful of our in and out breaths, we could see that different thoughts, emotions, ideas, memories come bubbling up to the surface of the mind. Yeah, usually these different thoughts and emotions come up, but we're not aware of them. But mindfulness makes us aware of them, enables us to recognize them. Okay, then the second factor of enlightenment is called here is translated as the enlightenment factor of discrimination of states, or we could also say investigation. Okay, the discrimination of states or the investigation of mind states. Okay, now there's another sutta, or actually several suttas. We'll take one next month, which says that this enlightenment factor distinguishes between the mental states as being wholesome and unwholesome, good and bad mental states, dark and bright mental states. Yeah, so with mindfulness, you become aware of the states, and then with investigation or discrimination, you're able to sort of distinguish them as good and bad, helpful and harmful. Okay, so once you distinguish these states of mind as good and bad, helpful and harmful, then one arouses or applies the enlightenment factor of energy. What is called the enlightenment factor of energy is really the same as in the Noble Eightfold Path, right effort. And with this factor, you apply the energy or effort to remove the unwholesome, the bad, the harmful mental states, and to strengthen and develop the good, beneficial, wholesome, the good and beneficial mental states. Okay, then as you start to make progress in removing the bad states, strengthening the good states, then your mind becomes more joyful, especially as you start to progress towards deeper concentration or samadhi. Then that joy turns into this quality that in Pali we call piti. And here in the sutta, the text uses the expression in Pali, it's niramisa piti. And that's here I translate it as spiritual rapture. And this word is used, or this expression niramisa piti, or spiritual rapture, because there's another kind of rapture, the rapture connected with sensual pleasures. And that is what the meditator has to avoid. Yeah, but this spiritual rapture is it's a new kind of joy that one has never experienced just by indulging in worldly pleasures. Okay, now this spiritual rapture is an uplifting mental state. It's a very beautiful and wonderful experience, but it also has a fault or a drawback. That is, it involves a little too much excitement, and that it sort of undercurrent of excitement that comes along with this rapture brings some disturbance to the mind. And so when that happens, when that joy arises or that rapture, we have to recognize it and not get attached to it. We just continue to focus on our meditation object, but with the determination for the mind to calm down. So as one progresses with the practice, then this rapture settles down and both the body and mind become calm. And that is called now the factor of tranquility. And I think it's important to note that the sutta uses the two phrases, the body becomes tranquil and the mind becomes tranquil. Yeah, so you see, the English word tranquility is a little bit uh, misleading because usually tranquility implies just a peaceful state of mind. But this particular quality, which is called passaddhi, whoops, in, in Pali is called passaddhi, applies to both the body and the mind. Yeah, so there are certain subtle disturbances of the body, disturbances of the mind. When passaddhi arises, then those disturbances are removed. Okay, now as tranquility or passaddhi gains in strength, it brings along a pleasant feeling, a feeling of happiness. Okay, now this pleasant feeling, for some reason, is not included among the enlightenment factors, but in other places, it comes between tranquility and samadhi, or concentration. For example, there is a sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya in chapter 12, sutta number 23. It says, with rapture as condition, tranquility arises. With tranquility as condition, sukha, pleasure or happiness arises. And then with pleasure or happiness as condition, then concentration or samadhi arises. Yeah, so sukha is not mentioned as an enlightenment factor, but I think this sequence is very important. It's very important to see that pleasure or happiness is a necessary condition for samadhi. Yeah, because a lot of people think that to succeed in their meditation practice, they have to push themselves so hard that they feel real misery and suffering. Yeah, but samadhi doesn't come through through making yourself miserable and inflicting a lot of suffering on yourself, but it comes when there is spiritual pleasure or happiness. Yeah, we could say that even though happiness is not mentioned as a separate enlightenment factor, but in the next paragraph of the text, it says, one whose body is tranquil and who is happy or who's experiencing pleasure. That for one whose body is tranquil and who is happy or experiencing pleasant feeling, the mind becomes concentrated. Okay, so when the mind becomes concentrated, then the enlightenment factor of concentration appears. Yeah, so this is the concentration, it's the unification of the mind on the object, the sustained, undisturbed focusing on the object. Okay, then the text says that the meditator now looks on with equanimity at the mind thus concentrated. And looking on with equanimity means that now the enlightenment factor of equanimity has arisen. So this is equanimity, the seventh factor of enlightenment. Okay, so in this state, the meditator is simply looking at the mind, which is flowing along at an even pace, not aroused by excessive energy, but not slacking and dull. So the commentaries sometimes compare the state of equanimity to a carriage drawn by two horses. Yeah, both horses are galloping at the same speed. Neither of the horses is running too fast or too slow. Okay, so this marks the, so when the horses are running not too fast or too slow, then the carriage is able to advance smoothly at an even pace. Okay, so this factor of equanimity marks the seventh of the seven factors of enlightenment. Yeah, a question that sometimes occurred to my mind and other people have raised is, why do the seven factors of enlightenment end in equanimity, which seems connected with samadhi, rather than ending with panya or wisdom? Yeah, in the sutta I referred to just a little while ago from the Samyutta Nikaya, it says that, remember, it says that with pleasure as condition, samadhi arises. And then it says from samadhi as condition, there arises the knowledge of things as they are. Yeah, I haven't found this question raised in the text, but so I could only offer a guess as an answer. Okay, I would say that the second factor of enlightenment, investigation, represents wisdom. Now, wisdom can perform different tasks. In the early stage of practice, as the second enlightenment factor, the function of wisdom is to distinguish our mental states, to distinguish the good and bad mental states. But once one reaches the stage of equanimity, the seventh factor, then I would say wisdom functions again, but now at a higher level. Now, based on that equanimity, with wisdom, the meditator examines the real nature of phenomena and sees into the universal marks of impermanence, suffering, and non-self. And this insight into the three marks of impermanence, suffering, and non-self, that is the deep insight that brings the attainment of enlightenment and liberation. And so at the end of the sutta, it says that when the seven enlightenment factors have been developed, then seven fruits and benefits can be expected. That is, the first one, you attain final knowledge or enlightenment early in this life. And then if you don't attain enlightenment early or during the course of your life, then you can still attain it around the time of death. And if you don't attain enlightenment at the time of death, then you become a non-returner and you can attain enlightenment in the next life. Okay, so that will do with my explanation of the suttas. And now we have a little time that we could use for some questions.
Well, Nami Bhante, thank you for taking my question. I just wanted to ask, so just to have a more clear understanding. So if somebody sits in seclusion and meditates and focuses on the breath, is it like somewhere along the way with mindfulness arising, all these other factors sort of slowly arise by themselves, or is this would this be like an accurate understanding of this, or I mean, when would these enlightenment factors arise? Like, is it during the breath meditation in formal practice when you're sitting in seclusion? Just wanted to have a clear understanding.
I would say that first, for the enlightenment factors to arise, you certainly have to make the deliberate effort to arouse those enlightenment factors. So when you're sitting in meditation and then focusing on the breath, already you have the enlightenment factor of mindfulness is there. Whoops. I'm just trying to get the factors in the list. Okay, so when you're focusing on the breath, then you have the enlightenment factor. Suppose you're doing it with mindfulness. So there you have the enlightenment factor of mindfulness. At least it's aroused. Okay, and then as you're focusing on the breath, different sort of thoughts, memories, plans, expectations arise. So you're distinguishing those states. Sometimes there'll be qualities that are helpful to the practice. Other times they'll just be distractions. So now you're making that discrimination of states. And then you're practicing with energy. You're making an effort to remove the unwholesome states and to strengthen especially your mindfulness and your focus on the object. So those, I would say, those are the three activating factors that are really the practices. But as I said, as these factors sort of come together and start to become successful, then when you get this clearing of the mind, then the states like rapture arises pretty much on its own. It's not something that you really deliberately bring that rapture into being. But when the mindfulness really settles on the object and the mind gets cleared of the disturbances, then this rapture arises on its own. And then you have to make a bit of an effort to settle that rapture down, basically not by latching onto it and getting carried away by it, but just continuing to focus on the object until the mind becomes tranquil on its own. And then that will lead to deeper concentration and equanimity. Yeah, does that make it clear?
Yes. So I guess this is all happening within deep meditation, I guess, when you're sitting in seclusion.
Yeah, certainly. Of course, but I should add, in everyday life, there are things we could do to nurture these factors of enlightenment. Yeah, so I was going to say that even though they sort of reach their peak in deep meditation, but there are things that we can do in our ordinary everyday life to sort of nurture these factors of enlightenment. Okay, I see another question. This is from Kilaya.
Thank you, Bhante. Thank you for the teaching. My question is about the relationship between sati and memory or recollecting. you read this really interesting passage from 46.3, which said that one recollects the Dhamma, thinks it over, and then that recollecting mindfulness factor is aroused from that.
Yeah.
Which seems different from Manapanasati, where we start with the breath and then investigation is then arousing. So is that understood through the connection between sati and recollecting or memory? Is there a relationship between the Sanskrit word smriti and the Pali sati?
Yeah, exactly. There is the connection. The original meaning of sati, before it was taken over by the Buddha, was memory, remembrance. And so we have the word here that's translated recollect. In Pali, it's anusarati. And this word comes from the prefix anu, and then the main part is sarati. Yeah, so I just put on into the file, you could see the Pali word sati corresponds to Sanskrit smriti, and they're derived from the verb sarati. Yeah, and so the Buddha took that word sati, which originally meant memory, and he used it somewhat in the sense of being attentive to the present. Yeah, but sometimes the verb sarati is used, and even the noun sati is used in Pali in the sense of memory or to remember. And then anu, the word rendered recollects in Pali is anusarati, which is the same verb sarati, just with the prefix anu. So if you practice mindfulness, then you develop a good memory. Okay, I could take only one more question, hoping it's a short question. So Young?
Bhante, thank you very much. Some of the factors like Vijaya, Piti, Sukha reminds me jhana factors. Could you explain how I can connect these factors?
Yeah, it looks like there's some close correspondence between the enlightenment factors and the jhana factors. So we have here.
I thought Dhamma Vicaya is more like.
Yeah, not Dhamma Vicaya, we don't find among the jhana factors, but we have rapture or piti, and of course, samadhi is involved in jhana, and then upekkha, equanimity, becomes prominent in the third and fourth jhanas. Yeah, but in my understanding, the enlightenment factors aim at wisdom or understanding, not merely as in absorption or concentration. Okay, I think I'm going to have to end now because I'll have to go up for the meal. So we'll end with the sharing of the merits. So I'll recite the verses in Pali for sharing the merits. Akasa ta chabuma ta deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanang. Akasa ta chabuma ta deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanang. Akasa ta chabuma ta deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang dukha pata chani dukha baya pata chani baya soka pata chani soka antu sabepi panino. Okay, thank you everybody for joining this morning or this afternoon, this evening, wherever you are. And again, thanks to Oleg for the task of translating. Okay, so we could end with 3 bows to the triple gem, to the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha.
Sadhu, sadhu,
Sadhu,
sadhu.
sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Bante.
Bhante.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thank
Bhante.
you,
Thank
Bhante.
you,
Thank you,
Bhante.
Bhante.
Good to have you, Bhante.
Okay.
Thank you, Bhante.
Enjoy the lunch.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, so I'll have to go up now.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bhante. Thanks, Ollie.
Thank you, Bhante, for wonderful teaching.
Okay, thank you.